SWOT Your Life. From Corporate Strategy to Personal Mastery by Walter Freeman. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Beast. How a Corporate Tool Became a Life Weapon. The year was 1964. The Beatles were conquering America. Civil rights marchers were conquering fear. And in a quiet conference room in Menlo Park, California, Albert Humphrey was trying to answer a question that had been bothering him for 3 years. Why do some organizations adapt to change while others die? Humphrey was a management consultant at the Stanford Research Institute, and he'd been hired by some of the biggest companies in America to figure out what was killing them. By the early 1960s, the corporate landscape was littered with giants who'd become dinosaurs. Companies that had dominated their industries for decades were suddenly losing to nimbler competitors. Market leaders were becoming market casualties. The conventional wisdom was that these failures were about resources, not enough money, not enough talent, not enough technology. But Humphrey's research showed something different. The dying companies had plenty of resources. What they lacked was honesty. Specifically, they couldn't answer 4 questions truthfully. What are we actually good at? Not what we used to be good at. Not what we wish we were good at. What can we do better than our competitors right now? Where are we genuinely weak? Not the weaknesses we've convinced ourselves don't matter. Not the problems we've been meaning to fix for years. Where are we actually vulnerable? What's changing in the world that could help us? Not the trends we're comfortable with, the ones that might require us to change how we operate. What's changing in the world that could destroy us? Not the threats we're already defending against, the ones we've been pretending aren't coming. Humphrey formalized these questions into a framework he called SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. The companies that could answer honestly survived. The ones that couldn't, didn't. The framework spread like wildfire. By the 1970s, Harvard Business School had made it a centerpiece of their case study method. By the 1980s, it was being used to navigate the Japanese manufacturing invasion, the personal computer revolution, and the birth of global competition. By the 1990s, you couldn't get a corporate strategy job without being fluent in SWOT. But somewhere along the way, something got lost. SWOT became a corporate ritual, something executives did in annual planning sessions and promptly forgot. It became a template instead of a discipline, a checklist instead of a mirror. This book is about taking the mirror back. Why SWOT works on your brain. There's a reason SWOT has survived for 60 years, while thousands of other business frameworks have come and gone. It's not just practically useful, it's psychologically powerful. Your brain has a problem with complexity. When you face a situation with many variables, like deciding whether to change careers, how to save a struggling relationship, or what to do about a health concern, your working memory gets overwhelmed. You can only hold about 4 chunks of information in your head at once. Anything more than that, and your brain starts taking shortcuts. These shortcuts feel helpful, but they're often disastrous. You focus on what's most vivid instead of what's most important. You overweight recent experiences and underweight long-term patterns. You pay attention to threats and ignore opportunities. You see your weaknesses but forget your strengths. Or worse, you do the opposite. You see only your strengths and pretend your weaknesses don't exist. SWOT breaks this pattern by giving your brain exactly 4 categories to work with. Not 3, not 5, 4. That number isn't arbitrary. It's just at the edge of what your working memory can handle, which means you can think about all 4 categories simultaneously without losing any of them. This creates a kind of forced balance. You can't just dwell on your weaknesses because you have to fill in the strengths box too. You can't only see threats because opportunities demand equal attention. The structure of the framework prevents the cognitive distortions that normally derail your thinking. There's another psychological benefit. When you write something down, you externalize it. It stops being a vague worry bouncing around your head and becomes a concrete object you can examine, question, and address. Brain imaging studies show that the act of writing about your problems activates different neural circuits than just thinking about them, circuits associated with problem solving rather than rumination. In other words, SWOT doesn't just help you think about your life, it changes how you think. from boardrooms to bedrooms. Let me tell you about Maria. In 2019, she owned a small bakery in Chicago that was slowly failing. She'd opened it 5 years earlier with savings from a corporate marketing career, and every year since, profits had shrunk. By the time I met her, she was 3 months from closing. I asked her to do a SWOT analysis, not of her bakery, of herself. She resisted at first. What did corporate strategy have to do with her situation? She needed customers, not frameworks. But she humored me, sitting down one evening with a piece of paper divided into 4 quadrants. Under strengths, she wrote, 15 years of marketing experience, deep community relationships, loyal, if small, customer base, recipes that people drive across town for. Under weaknesses, no social media presence, terrible at asking for help, price too low, exhausted from doing everything herself. Under opportunities, the explosion of delivery apps, corporate catering contracts she'd never pursued, a food blogger who'd recently moved to her neighborhood, crowdfunding platforms she'd never considered. Under threats, a new chain bakery opening 2 blocks away, rising ingredient costs, her own burnout, the fact that she hadn't had a vacation in 4 years. Looking at those 4 quadrants changed everything. She realized she'd been treating her marketing expertise as something from her past life instead of her most valuable asset. She'd been so focused on the threat of competition that she'd ignored a food blogger who lived around the corner, someone who would eventually write about her bakery and send hundreds of new customers through her doors. But the biggest insight was about pricing. Maria had been charging less than her competitors because she felt uncomfortable asking people to pay what her products were actually worth. When she saw this written in the weaknesses quadrant, right next to exhausted from doing everything herself, the connection became obvious. She wasn't just undercharging, she was working herself to death to subsidize her discomfort with her own value. Within 6 months, Maria had raised her prices, launched a corporate catering program, and used a small crowdfunding campaign to hire her first employee. The bakery didn't just survive, it became the most profitable it had ever been. The framework didn't give Maria any new information. It gave her a new way to see information she already had. The 4 questions applied to life. In business, SWOT asks about market position and competitive advantage. For your life, the questions translate slightly differently. Strengths are the genuine capabilities, resources, and advantages you bring to any situation. They include skills you've developed, relationships you've built, habits that serve you, values that anchor you, and circumstances that work in your favor. These aren't things you wish were true about yourself. They're things that are observably, demonstrably true. Weaknesses are the gaps, limitations, and vulnerabilities that hold you back. They include skills you lack, habits that hurt you, blind spots in your thinking, resources you're missing, and patterns that keep showing up in your failures. Again, not the weaknesses you're comfortable admitting, but the ones that actually cause problems. Opportunities are external changes, resources, or connections that could improve your situation if you acted on them. They include trends in your industry, relationships you could develop, technologies you could adopt, and doors that are opening in front of you. The key word is external. Opportunities exist outside your control, but you can choose whether to pursue them. Threats are external forces that could damage your situation whether you act or not. They include economic shifts, competitive pressures, health risks, relationship strains, and changes in your environment. Like opportunities, threats are external. You can't stop them from existing, but you can prepare for them. Notice the pattern. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, about you. Opportunities and threats are external, about the world. SWOT asks you to be honest about both who you are and where you are. This dual focus is crucial. Most people, when they try to improve their lives, focus on only one half of the equation. Self-help books tend to be relentlessly internal. Change your thoughts, change your habits, change your mindset. Business books tend to be relentlessly external. Read the market, spot trends, seize opportunities. SWOT insists on both. You can't understand your situation without understanding both yourself and your environment. What's coming? The rest of this book will take you through the major arenas of life where SWOT can make a difference. Each chapter follows a similar structure, but I want to be clear about what you're getting and what you're not. You're getting a framework for thinking, a set of questions that will help you see each arena more clearly than you have before. You're getting real stories of people who applied these frameworks and what happened. And you're getting practical tools, templates, exercises, and specific actions you can take. You're not getting a guarantee. No framework can promise transformation. What SWOT can do is show you where you are and what's possible. What you do with that information is up to you. Let's start with the most fundamental question. Where are you right now?